Very cool. All right, so continue with Tamerlane. We're gonna mention what was Tamerlane, his ethnicity, other things about him, the more of the man.
Now, first, we have to apologize to Tamerlane. The last time we tried to do this video, I wasn't, I was drinking a lot more than this. So, Tamerlane didn't like drunkenness, so I was afraid I was going to have to go before him in hell.
So he didn't drink at all, I guess.
No, and apparently, if he did, it was just a little bit. He rolled from under a big tent. Milton used, apparently, according to Lamb, Milton used Timur as his model for Satan in hell and Paradise Lost.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean,
that's very interesting.
This guy was like really inspirational. Probably had something to do with the obsession that maintained itself in the 1400s and early 1500s for Prester John, the supposed Christian king of the Ethiopians.
Yeah, Prester John, right.
So, if you look at Gibbon's treatment of the Huns, which would be the prototypical Mongol, Tartar, Turkic people,
Asiatic steppe people
that went from around about Lake Baikal in Mongolia all the way to the Hungarian plain and even made it all the way to the English Channel. Okay, that group of people consumed the people that they learned their horse archer technology from, which were the Scythians, the Sake, the Massagetae, the Sarmatians, and then the Cumans and the Pechenegs.
Oh, the
Pechenegs. These are all like blonde, tattooed, Caucasian, dirtbag, biker, horsemen, composite bow guys that are the legacy people from the original Aryan population.
They were the original steppe nomad attackers of the ancient world.
So those are the guys that their ancestors left their tombs with their blonde and redheaded people
in China,
in
Western
the mountains,
China,
in Mongolia, and Siberia, and northern China, in those tombs that they still occasionally dig up. And eventually, the Siberian people, who were the tundra people, eventually learned this technology, the horse technology, just like the Comanche, who were Stone Age, like foot mobile spearmen, learned it from the Utes, who learned it from the Apaches, who learned it from the Spanish. Okay, so the horse technology flows up into like this semi-Arctic area, and then those people use it to get down to the good land. Okay? So by the time that you end up with the Huns, you've got a Mongol, European, Asiatic population. The king of the Scythians once told Darius of Persia, "I will not stand and fight you until you find the tombs of my ancestors," and they are 3,000 miles to the east. So he meant Lake Baikal, those mountains up there. Now, the situation in the 400s and 500s, if you look at the Ring of the Nibelung, I'm probably butchering that, it's also covered in the Poetic Eddas. In the Poetic Eddas, where the Huns are the bad guys, there's total interbreeding with the Huns and the Goths, and the Swedes and the Norwegians, and there is no mention of any racial difference.
Oh God, you can get Varg mad.
I mean, there isn't. There is the Poetic Eddas do not mention that, the ugly Hunnish chicks with black hair, nothing like that. There's literally like no racial difference made. So this is the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because there was a source. There were two men who knew Timur personally, who wrote about him, and they were his slaves. And the Arab one, who was his slave for decades, hated him, although he always said he was fair, which was, coming from an Arab, is not necessarily a compliment.
Oh Jesus! Oh, it's racism.
and he would execute people, which is like standard punishment. And then when they were doing the same thing,
you shouldn't have done that. Right.
Up until Charles Dickens was writing novels.
Oh, come on.
He got executed for everything, right?
Yeah.
So, this man, I think his name was Omar. I might be wrong. He was an Arab.
Omar, where Omar at?
He lived with Timur for 20 years, thereabouts. And he's the one that gave a physical description of Timur. He described him as having magnetic eyes. I don't recall a color, but the Arab described Timur as white.
Oh,
okay. Now, the term white was not a racial noun anywhere in European history until the 1600s.
Maybe he meant pale and lighter skin.
It said white. So white is a racial noun, comes from the Middle East and North Africa. It comes from
the slave
the area where Arabic is spoken.
Right.
Okay. It has no source in European history as a racial noun.
Yeah, they took a lot of European slaves.
So what does, when this Arab says white, this is the same group of people who generally reserve that term for Christian Europeans.
Oh, okay. Careful.
Yeah. Look, it's Upper Central Asia.
Right.
How many Slavic slave girls have been abducted by Mongols and have been raped and dropped babies along the way?
The babies.
Going back to, Ulaanbaatar. Okay.
Right, exactly.
So you're obviously, to me, you're talking about a mixed race person. Okay. Now, Lamb says, well, obviously, Omar was wrong, even though Omar lived with this guy for 20 years, and Omar was a non-white, Arab, and he called him white. Okay, but by the time that Harold Lamb was writing, the term white had a lot of socioeconomic things that had been attached to it along the way. So it was not a compliment. When an Arab called you white, it was not a compliment.
That's all right.
Okay. So anyhow, Timur's obviously got some legacy Scythian, genetics in there. He's claimed as a Turkic or Turco-Mongol. Okay, the Mongol claim comes exclusively from the Mughals, which were his descendants, his great-grandsons. Right. They claimed descent from Genghis Khan through Timur.
A lot of people did that.
Okay, well, the only claim they have is that Timur kicked the shit out of the descendants of Genghis Khan.
Right.
Okay, that's it. Timur would never accept the title of Khan because he was not Mongol and everybody knew it, and he trafficked in very blunt honesty.
Right.
Okay. It was important to him that everybody knew who he was. He was smarter than you, and he would never quit, and you couldn't kick his ass. Okay, so why give away that hand when you have it by starting to play all these prevaricating games? So he did not do that because he thought it would diminish himself. Right. The Turkic thing, he was adopted into a Turkic tribe because he was a good fighter, and he was adopted by a very weak Turkoman leader that needed a strong-arm enforcer.
Right.
And even when he was fighting this guy's battles for him, Timur would be charging, and he'd turn around, and this guy would be hanging around back there somewhere. Okay.
Yeah, he was no friend of the Turks.
I mean, he eventually ended up ruling over all the Turkomans, and he conquered the Ottoman Turks. The Seljuk Turks had been demoted and ground to dust, whatever. The Mongols he regarded as having better human material than he had in the Tartars. So by the Tartars, you're really talking about a people that's a mix of Turk, Mongol, and then all these other groups that are in there. He saw a great danger in the Chinese. He died of old age while he was being carried. He rode, and then once he couldn't ride anymore, he was carried to a castle where he died. in the winter, he felt his death coming on, and he thought it was so important to destroy China.
Yeah, the Ming
because
Dynasty.
it was the 1/4 of the universe that he had not destroyed. He was just trying to buy enough time that his sons and his grandsons would not immediately be enslaved by enemies.
Right.
And he did, because his great-grandsons ended up conquering India. Now, people don't understand the reach of the Chinese. There was the offensive that ended up driving the Hun split into two parts.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
The Chinese chased them into
right.
west.
Well, half of them quit and
Yeah.
they surrendered to the Chinese.
Yeah.
The other half of them, that was Attila and his boys. They interbred with all these blonde races and they invaded Europe.
Right.
Now, that expedition started out with over 300,000 men. It came back with less than 30,000 men. Okay, but it came back intact. Okay, so this is an expedition that can lose 90% of its men and keep its continuity. In the 200s, there was an alliance between the Armenians and the Roman Empire against the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire.
Right.
The rebooted old Magi Empire, which was really strict. It was really quite a homogenous thing. The deposed prince, the prince in exile of Armenia, had a buddy. Well, first of all, this prince, actually, the last man to win an Olympic boxing contest in 383 AD was Varzadates, an Armenian prince. One of his ancestors, about 150 years earlier, was like the founder of Okinawan karate. He was supposed to be able to like strike off bullhorns off of the heads of bulls.
Nice.
He was that strong. He was a hero, and he was sponsored by the Roman enemies of the Persians, who then controlled Armenia, and he had a buddy named Mango. Mango was a giant Chinese mercenary who was like, God, he like deserted from some fort in Central Asia or something like that.
Well, people forget the Ming Dynasty overthrew the Yun Dynasty, which was the Mongol dynasty of China, and did a number on them. So the Mings were pretty. They were on the offensive, let's say, against the northern and the steppe nomads.
So Timur absolutely knew what he lived in the middle of, because Samarkand was the crossroads to the world.
Right.
And
the Silk Road.
He was one of those rude Islamic potentates who collected scientists like I collected Matchbox cars and Army men when I was a kid.
We believe in science here.
Okay, I mean, he was just that guy. He wanted to bring everything that he could to Samarkand to make it a world city, as Spangler would say, and have a 2,000-mile wasteland around it, so that none of these evil empires could get to it. Yeah. And he actually succeeded in doing that. Now, he accepted the mission of Diego,
right.
The Christian knight,
right.
which I think Robert E. Howard used a crusading Frankish character, right. was based on Diego. Spent time at Timur's court, and Lamb, in his book Tamerlane, Conqueror of the Earth, does a very good job of showing the milieu that Timur traveled and conquered in, particularly when he took an army into Siberia so that he could come south against the Golden Horde that was in Russia.
Right.
He went all the way to the top of the world to come down on his enemies. He was living in a world where you had these lethal slave trading nomads who were of all these ethnicities they talked about. You had Hebrew Khazars. You had Tengarist animists. You had animist Mongols. You had
Nestorians.
You had those guys. The Nestorian Christians were all the way in China.
Right.
You had many different Islamic groups of different races. So he was he was welding all this together. He always avoided taking the honorific Sword of Islam titles. He would never place himself as a jihadist.
Yeah, right.
He would not do that. He refused to do that, and he seems to have been honest in doing that.
Yeah.
And one of the last known episodes of his life, he ends up addressing it. Should probably be the thing that we end the video with. That was a letter that he had dictated.
Oh.
He was addressing one of his sons, which was the King of Castile.
All right.
And
Do one more vid.
it,